Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruti Aresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Lakandarupa Stiti Areva Moksho Brahma Advitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is a sure and certain declaration of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sarvashruti Shiroratna Samudbhasitav Murtai Vedantam Bhuja Suryaya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chaitanya Shashvata Shanto Vyomatita Niranjanaha Bindu Nada Kalatita Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. O effulgent sun of self-luminous knowledge, the radiant light of Vedanta is the warmth of wisdom that you emanate, and brilliant rays of infinite spiritual teachings reveal the lustrous jewel of your compassionate understanding. Reverent salutations to the ultimate Guru. More subtle than the ethers, eternally pure, impossible to taint, you embody that essential part of consciousness that is indescribably peaceful and serene. Beyond the initial seed, the primal vibration, and the web of time, reverent salutations to the ultimate Guru. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Satyena. Om Satyena Labhyastapasa Yesatma Samyagyanena Brahmacharyena Nicham Antaha Sharirehi Jyotirmayo Hi Shrubraha Yam Pashanti Atayaha Kshinadoshaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. The Atman, the indivisible self, in all beings and all things, is realized by knowledge, moderation, veracity, and austerity. All of these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it, everywhere, existing in everything, even here in this very mind and body. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us, and may Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings, and may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. So sharing with you a few of the wonderful wisdom chants that come out of the tradition of Vedanta and Tantra yoga, samkhya, which we take together as one eternal Sanatana Dharma and place our minds upon in the company of the live streaming audience nowadays in these trying times so that we can plumb the depths of the Dharmic wisdom, which is so eternal. It comes back to us every cycle of time and is therefore not something that you can look back in time to find an origin to, just like everything else in existence. It's unoriginated. One of the great secrets of the Indian darshanas, particularly Advaita Vedanta, and expressed in other ways in Zen Buddhism and in Buddhism in general, is this eternal verity we call Brahman in Vedanta, that has no origin, but when you look at its highest tattvas or principles that are side by side with it, that emanate from it, you might say, like the word Om, or the Madhat, as we studied last two classes now. This is our third class on this series called Brahman and the Upanisads, Points and Principles. When you look at that, you find that they too are unoriginated, that nothing's ever created and nothing's ever destroyed, and including matter and energy, all the way down to what we call Maya in Vedanta. It's just continually rising and falling, like the dream I had the other night where I was with myself. It's a nice way of putting it. I was just with myself, 100%, and everything around me, it was like almost like floating in the mother's womb, as they say. Everything perfect all around me, not necessarily peaceful or blissful, just the way it should be. And noticed events, phenomena, thoughts, beings, all just rising naturally and falling all the time, and nothing was changing or happening. Sort of like Sri Ramakrishna's vision in meditation. What to speak of a dream that in which he saw the word, and which we will look at hopefully today, Omkara, the cause of everything. If you want to look for a cause, it's not Brahman or God, it's word. So Sri Ramakrishna said that that word was, when he came upon it, was constantly giving rise to realms, lokas, akashas, worlds, inner and outer, and as it did, they would fall again back into the word, and no time was passing when that phenomena was seen, a very high phenomena. And so he realized he was in the eternal moment. It's a very deep secret. There's actually 6 doorways into that secret, which is a chart maybe we can look into that I've created for that teaching, 6 doorways to yoga. It all has to do with an eternal moment that everything is in, a breathless moment. That's why the non-duality has to be looked at first and foremost, even if you don't understand it. And we did that basically with aparinama, the unchanging, and ajativada, the unborn, in our first class 2 weeks ago. And when you get a little bit of hint of what's really going on, or in this case not going on, then you can find out what's going on and make some sense out of it. So that eternal moment is what's not going on. It's difficult to describe it. You might have to sit for 49 days under a tree somewhere, or 12 days and 12 nights in the wilderness in order to have it come upon you again and remember its timeless, birthless, deathless, formless nature. An aha moment, a kumbhaka moment where breath seizes in delight, as Ramprasad sings in one of his songs. And time goes away, space goes away, phenomena, beings go away. Go away in the sense that they're impeding or impinging upon your consciousness anymore. You're just witnessing them, and so you realize what timelessness is. Hard to describe, but you can get a kind of taste for it, a kind of flavor for it. just like a tanmatra from an element. The element suggests its essence. Water suggests its essence, and fire suggests its essence. So you can actually experience these in meditation. We'll look at one of those unknown principles today called prana, and how it suggests its essence too. And I have some treats for you out of one of the Upanishads about prana that will give us a deeper look into it. So you can see, going down the list here, what I'm talking about. We've looked at Ajativada, the birthless, deathless, breathless moment, as we just said, and we followed it up by looking at God's mind, the great mind, or Mahat. Also, maybe that's where Om comes in, the word, and where Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic egg, comes in, where the Trinity comes in. This is fairly much Vedantic in content, points and principles of what the Upanishads are saying. The study I did about that decades ago. But the Tantra would throw in a few other things, as we'll see when we look at Sristrihasta today, about how they view what they have found out in their deepest contemplations about that word which we use today surreptitiously called creation, because of course we're very reticent about using that word. Since everything is unoriginated, then it doesn't get created out of nothing, or when the creation happens, it's not real. It's out of some thought in the mind it got created. And so they're always thinking like that in India. All the darshanas think about that way, mind-only schools. So you make something solid out of a thought. As Holy Mother Ma Sharda told us, objects are just thought made concretized, she said. So if you get into that vein of thinking, which is more true than an idea of creation or evolution of something, and you see it's immediate, it comes from an essence which is timeless. Ultimately, that would be Brahman. But Brahman can't be the cause for it. It's just the essence in it all. And when the essence takes on manifestation and it's got substance in it, apparently, but when you look behind it, there is no substance. It's just vibrating particles and change. Very rapid and swift change. So the mind has to be faster than the object. It's called manojavitvam. Patanjali used that teaching in his Yoga Sutras, the swiftness of the mind, he calls it, and borrowed it from Tantra, I think. So the mind realizes what it's done, that is, how it can create all of these things, so supposedly so. So we use the word projection, or shrishti, and then how it gets sustained, sthiti, and then laya, how it gets dissolved. And a passage of time could, if you study it and you believe in time, could make that seem like 4 billion years. But if you saw it with the third eye open, as Jesus said, then you would see it as an eternal moment. It's all happening all the time, and no change is taking place, and nothing's getting created or destroyed. It's just cyclic. So cycles can be a problem, but cycles can also be a great way of waking up to what's happening around you, or apparently happening. So with that as a sort of introduction to these topics, we looked at the Mahat, because that would be a mind that's, if our mind is swift enough and even pulls the wool over our own eyes, and we don't know how powerful our mind is, then the Mahat must be incredibly swift, almost immediate. And she who operates the mind, Shakti, is going to be faster than the fastest. Or if she wants to be, slower than the slowest. Or if she chooses to be higher than the highest, and she can even be lower than the lowest. That's called all-pervasiveness, omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, the 3 ohms, I like to call that in English. So it's suggested in that word, A-U-M, which is the correct spelling, so that it's a triputi and not om, O-M, which is okay, but doesn't really philosophically sound. So we found that at the level of Mahat, a great sacrifice takes place in the form of another principle there that's connected inherently deep into the Mahat, that is Ishvara, or later the Avatar. Ishvara would be that great being out of which avatars would come for the good of the many, for loka sangraha. Nothing to gain by coming into form, in fact, very much reticent about even taking on a form, but nonetheless does it for the sake of other beings, the highest good of living beings. So sacrifice at that level we looked at it as the 5 sacrifices last week, and that is how you do sacrifice every day to the gods, to the humankind, to the ancestors, to even the bhutas, the animals, plants, and insects, caretake them, and the rishis too. Peace and bliss be upon them all the time, where they would have this wisdom feast to give you through a different kind of particle than food particles or pleasure particles or even thought particles. It'd be intelligent particles. Jnana matras are called in Sanskrit. So they knew about the particle theory on 5 different levels. That is, instead of just one. The physical world ceased to enchant them and enthrall them and ensnare them and allure them. And they then began to see it as their own projection, going away in deep sleep, coming back and waking. This is getting a little bit suspicious, you see. What's going on here? Let's call it Maya, but then find out that Maya isn't doing it by itself. My mind in Maya is doing it. And so beginning to jump stages at the higher level of consciousness till such a moment happens when they see the very breath they're taking has particles in it, has movements. And you have to go inside to find them and to examine them. Like we just said, the kumbhaka, that's breathless all of a sudden, can happen by studying the 3 movements of your breathing exercise. You don't just want to turn your lungs into a pair of bellows. That's not going to get you enlightenment. Huffing and puffing. Breath of fire. And that would be a horrible thing to do without a mask nowadays. Because of all the excretion coming out of your nose when you do it. So you need to be able to study the breath so that you can understand the movement of the prana underlying it. So there's another particle, another level of particles, and then thought particles, and then intelligent particles, and finally no particles at all is one of the wonderful things of the study. And that's where you bridge formlessness in formless consciousness, timeless, deathless awareness, and all that offers. I mean, everything. It offers everything to you. Like witnessing it all, and then knowing that it came out of you, and being able to engage in Srishti Sthiti Laya, the secret of projectionism, consciously, with awareness. Awareness of intelligence, awareness of mind, awareness of prana, energy, and awareness of matter would be the result of that samyama you did by combining concentration, meditation, and samadhi, in those 3 into one thing. Then living intelligence comes forth. That's a quote from the Yoga Sutras. And then this living intelligence allows you to live in the fire of yoga, burning everything away that is not real, burning everything away that's almost real, or wants to pose itself as real, all the way up to Ishvara and Mahat and so forth. Dissolve it all into the great self. So the sacrifice that's going on at that level is for others. It's Mahayagya, and that's the great being who is the pillar around which everything else is revolving, like a pillar of fire in the Kena Upanishad, where all beings at all levels of that pillar are rotating around it, whether they know it or not. The gods come to know it eventually. And so we took that up in 5 ways, and then in 12 other ways in the Gita last week, as you remember, the storehouse of Vedic sacrifices that Krishna talks about. And we looked, then we started to talk about Srishti Rahasya, Samsara, and Prana. That's the next 3 most mentioned tattvas, or principles, in the Upanishads as a collection. So these are not put in necessarily any order of evolution like Samkhya would do it. That's not really the point, is which came first. In this study, it's how often was it mentioned in the Upanishads. That, to me, that meant how important, how much more important was it to know about some things than other things. How many mentions did they get? Taking a tally, as it were. And so what was high on the list there was this teaching of Srishti Rahasya, so that beings could not only, in an age like this, believe in and learn about reincarnation, about birth, life, and death, about relative existence, about cycles, about ancestors and humans trading places, all of that, which is rare enough to hear about in anyone's upbringing in this country and in the West per se. But they could also learn it as a system that has been practiced and known from time out of mind. If you look at the timeless, deathless scriptures that I just chanted about. Sarva Shruti Siroratna, and then after that I chanted Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktesha. Shruti, you see, it's all about the scriptures, what to hear in each birth, what I have to hear right away, so that I remember and I don't fall into the process of a darksome mind allured by Maya into thinking that there's only body, senses, and pleasure objects to the whole picture. Therefore letting myself out the back door without getting any great realization. How to live a dharmic life, or better yet, a divine life. Probably best of all, no life at all. That is like floating in the Divine Mother's womb, observing all of this as a dream. I'll take a dream lifetime, thank you. Here's a dream death in return. And it was just all that, and I knew it all the time I was going through it. Isn't that quite different than my birth is real, my suffering's real, all the things that happened to me were real, and then I died for reals. See? For reals, man. Never knowing that it was all just a dream inside your own mind. So that's why we study the Mahat, and we have a great mind to go to. That we're like a spark off of that fire. The individual mind down here, we haven't gotten to that yet, and the collective mind in between. Hopefully in this series, which we might extend a few classes, because we haven't chosen our next series yet, we can plumb some of the depths of the principles that are mentioned in the Upanishads at a qualified and a dualistic level, because those are also for the non-dualist to look at if they're interested in fishing people out of suffering, of unnecessary suffering, you see. We don't quite go, the Vedantist doesn't quite go to that statement that we have to save all living beings from suffering, because suffering is necessary at this level. Necessary suffering you don't want to save them from. Like Padre Pio, a woman asked him, would you take away my suffering? Because he was showing the stigmata and so forth. So he was having deep communion, or what we call darshana, with Jesus. Oh, I know that Jesus is there. Will you take away my suffering? And he said, Madam, if you knew how beneficial your suffering was to you, you wouldn't ask me to take it away. So there's a difference, viveka, discrimination, between that suffering that drives you on towards higher realization. It's a part of Maya. It's a part of your incarnation. It's a part of birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. Those are all types of suffering. We'll look at that right away off the top about the three kinds of bondage and also the three sufferings that turned into four sufferings later. Lord Buddha's Four Noble Truths actually weren't all that new. Lord Kapila had them as three thousands of years earlier. And of course we look at that as, well, Buddha was born in Kapilavastu, in Kapila's own birthplace. These souls might just be the same soul at different times. So this, back to this idea then of reincarnation and how valuable that is, that gets suggested to us, even taught to us if we want to go deeper into it, by this tantric, basically, tantric view of Srishti Rahasya. It's also there in its own form in the Upanishads. It's very hard to separate them. Kundalini Yoga Upanishad, for instance, is one of the 108 Upanishads, and it's very distinctly tantric in its content. And there it is as one of the 108 original Upanishads, so it's not like it's easy to go along and just separate these two rivers when they want to mingle their waters. Looking into one great river there, trying to, oh, you want to separate that tantric teaching from this Vedantic water. Not going to be that easy. So in terms specifically of this next entry on the chart, we have Srishti Rahasya, the secret of creation. Or remember, we want to use that word projection as a little bit more accurate way of saying. And in fact, when we talk about Srishti, Sthiti, and Laya in Vedanta, we like to one-upmanship, better the term creation, preservation, and destruction. If you want to use those words, then we feel like that's a tempest in a teapot going on continually inside the two hands of the Divine Mother, whose two hands are just projection and withdrawal, you might say. So this creation, preservation, and destruction are going on inside of these two hands. And that's where reality apparently becomes two. You'd have to have this idea of Shiva and Shakti come forth in your tradition. And there is a version of that in Vedanta called Brahma and its Maya, Brahman and its Maya. So we know that this isn't alien to either system, either great river of philosophy in India. But looking at it specifically in its own auspice is very revealing. And as any good non-dually based system starts out, at the top of the chart there is Niskala Shiva. So it's free of time, doesn't have Kala in it. Shiva is famous for being master of time. That is past, present, and future. He's Trikaladarshi, that's one of his names. So he transcends the process of past, present, and future. So how is it then, where is his origin if we're talking about origins and looking for it? It's beyond origin in a timeless state or condition. Hard to find words for it in English. Transcendent reality is what I put there in parens. So if you come out of, if he is beckoned out through whatever means into the sportive play called Leela, which is provided for nicely in Tantra. It's not necessarily that favored in Advaita Vedanta, but if you're talking about something that's projected, it hardly matters. It's not real because movement's not real in ultimate reality. It's niskala. It doesn't have time. It also doesn't have movement. It doesn't have any of the dualities in it. Again, that moment where the soul would realize that and just be shocked, put into jada samadhi, as Sri Ramakrishna said, stunned state, like Christ depicted under the tree sitting there, he looked inside himself and saw that, had that moment of spiritual epiphany, samadhi. That was called a shock state or stunned state. Can't move. You're just totally taken with what you've seen inside. So nothing outside's operating. Senses, elements, hands. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say, yes, that's when the Divine Mother locked my knees and my elbows in place when I was sitting. And she told me, don't move. So, and she said she wouldn't let me free of that stunned state, and I'd actually hear the lock click in the place in my elbows and knees. And I couldn't move for a long time. So she wanted to make sure that I drank in fully that condition and saw what was there to see. Saw with this eye, the third eye. So it's a very high state, Jata Samadhi, mentioned by Sri Ramakrishna. So you would have to use that as a kind of metaphor. If Shiva is in an eternally shocked or stunned state, because you see the images of him lying supine and Mother Kali is dancing on his breast, and he's got a horn in his ear. You see, that's the Om. He's hearing directly the sound of Om, and his eyes are rolled up in his head in total samadhi. Having seen her, the scriptures and the songs say, he was thrown into this stunned state, and he's the flower and she's the fragrance. Is one beautiful analogy that's painted for us. So, how to get him out of that state so that this expression that's potential in everything, that wisdom can manifest itself at all levels, that's called a whole cycle. The beginning of a whole cycle of time, a Mahayuga. Or maybe at the end of many Mahayugas there comes a Mahapralaya, a great emptiness, a great formlessness, a great sleep. Mahanidra, yoga calls it. And then a beginning will happen again, a so-called beginning. It's just that there's nothing new created, and that's why the word creation falls short of any way of communicating what this is to us. I mean, it's probably better sung about than it is spoken about. Then it communicates to us better than words can say, with some attended by bhakti and prema, love and devotion and so forth, that really penetrates deep into the heart. Sumana, 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 Hara, Kanti Ute, Shrita Rajani, 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 Karavakravite, Sunayama Vi, Brahmara, 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 Tipate, Jaya, Jaya, Hey, Mahishasura Mardini, Ramyaka Pardini, Shaila Sute. Jaya Jaya Hey, Mahishasura Mardini, Ramyaka Pardini, Shaila Sute. There's about 20 of those verses in this stotram to Mother Durga. And this one relates in English translation, says to us, in context of this inexplicable state that comes over Shiva when Shakti springs from his heart like that. And what's in store for consciousness when it emerges from this homogeneous state of formlessness, and where no time and no space, no worlds, and nothing exists but just this inexpressible light of pure conscious awareness, and what's in store for it when they break, when the consciousness breaks into two, called Shiva and Shakti. In this way, it said, the goddesses and gods gather from distant realms to have the vision of Shiva and Shakti fresh on the scene, their minds as pure and tender as newly blossomed lotus flowers. A spiritual fragrance permeates all the worlds and brings joy to all living beings. Amidst the radiance of these heavenly bodies, your own precious countenance sparkles bewitchingly, like a full moon's luster at midnight. The wisdom glances from your all-comprehending eyes seem to penetrate everywhere like liquid streams of effulgent honeybees. Victory to thee, O destroyer of demons, beloved of Shiva and daughter of the eternal snow mountains. Victory unto thee. So that Jaya Jaya He Mahishasuramardini Ramyakapardini Shailasute, a beautiful refrain that you hear sung. I've even heard it in the Bible Belt in America in a Hindu temple when I walked in there to share Jaima music with them. And they were making lays for the goddess. It was Durga Puja, Navaratri. And while they were making these flowers, just the women would just break in while they were making the lays and garlands, sitting on the floor there, the temple, just break into this beautiful hymn to Durga, singing to her while they laced up these garlands to put around her. So even in America, and in the Bible Belt in 1980, I think it was. So that's how far-reaching the devotees of the Mother feel about her, and just one of 20 verses that expresses this inexpressible way in which Shakti will invite Shiva into two-ness. That is, all the potential is inherent in Shiva, but it needs a medium to draw it out and put it into form. This is a Srishti Rahasya. It's the beginning of the secret of creation, how the one bifurcates, breaks into two, and later on turns into the many. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. But as long as we're singing about Shakti's majesty, perhaps we should also do the same with Lord Shiva. Tulsidas has a good way of explaining that. When he sings in fashion, so we've sung to Shakti, here let's sing a little bit to Lord Shiva about the same thing. Shankara Mahadeva Deva, Shankara Mahadeva Deva, Shankara Mahadeva Deva, Sevaka Sura Jake. Lapati Japati Javo Byala Auroda Bhagachala Rundamala Chandrafala Drigvishala Jake Shankara Mahadeva Deva Shankara Mahadeva Deva Shankara Mahadeva Deva Sevaka Sura Jake. So Tulsidas's verses, and there are more. This one states, in this sensational way of beatific vision, you might say, at this level of Srishti Rahasya. A tiger skin around his handsome body, his cosmic dance astounds his many legions gathered around him. Transported they watch as writhing snakes and disheveled hair swirl around a graceful neck garlanded with skulls. Light from the crescent moon on his brow enhances the enthralling scene. And there he stands, the one whose powers and glories are often told but seldom seen. Narada and Sharada are unable to describe his beauty. The Lord of Gods is rendered mute. Brahma and Ganesh, witnessing his awesome appearance, can only utter his praises innumerable times. So, which dance is more fantastic? If you just take one of the verses out of these different stotrams, the Mahishasura Mardini stotram and this beautiful bhajan by Tulsidas. Tulsidas, who's a great lover of Ram, singing about Shiva. He also has beautiful hymns about Divine Mother, so talk about interlaced. Well, this is just by way of giving you some sort of idea and some feelings, increasing some deeper feeling in you, to open the hardened heart and release the confined mind into at least some possibility of cosmic play at a very high level of consciousness. That is your own consciousness. It's going on there in that wide open space beyond religion. It's all going on there. You have to visit it and drink it in. It hardly matters to the lover of reality if it's real or unreal. It's not a philosophical thing anymore. It can be an imagination, but it's much better than a nightmare. It can be a vision, which is much better than mundane human conventional life. And it's all projection from the mind. So which level of the projection are you going to want to partake of? The kingdoms of heaven are within you. Find them. All the gods and goddesses are within you. Find them. Your Ishtam you're meditating on every day is within you. Find him or her. And connect. And see how your life changes. That mundane, human, conventional life that you're complaining about, with its so-called sufferings and illusions and ignorance. Well, in a short time I've exhausted a few words, but used a few aids here. I get a little help from my friends, as they say, about this level of two becoming one. So if you look there in the chart, transcendent reality is going to emanate, and it needs a medium to lure it into emanation. This is a divine play called Leela, or sportive play. Read about it in the Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is the most current and readily available in English way of reading about a great soul who was plunged into this sport all the time, and having the samadhis that came out of it too. Well, there you see a bunch of lines and arrows. When the consciousness starts emanating, just like a sun emanates rays, and we'll look at that later in terms of the prana, then you see that next entry there with the two images of Shiva and Shakti on either side in color. Chid Jyoti. This is Paramashiva's ocean of conscious light. Also could be called Patanjali's ocean of sorrowless light. And called by different things in different times, by different seers of India. So out of that ocean of conscious light, this idea of two-ness occurs. The two who are one spring forth. That is Shiva and Shakti. I'm taking you through this now. We're coming down out of this homogeneous awareness into echelons of extremely subtle substance, content, which can only be visited and understood by the mind that would raise itself to that sort of level, to contemplate it, even to entertain it. So you see what happens then in the dynamics. There you see Shiva on the left-hand side. Shiva Jnanam enters into form. So the idea in Tantra is that Shiva holds everything of the highest content inside of himself. But the problem with Shiva in that form is that nobody gets to share in it. It remains unmanifest. So how to bring that knowledge out to benefit all living beings is in the mind of Shakti, who draws near him. Chit Jyoti, she's the light of awareness. And so she draws near him, and what happens there is the word, Om. That's the sound of love they make when these two get near each other. These two, how can you even call them perfected souls? They're the very highest level of consciousness, taking its first forms, playing away from oneness. And souls will imitate them later in time, down the spectrum. If time comes into it, beings are trying to imitate that perfect relationship. And here on earth even, people are looking for that perfect relationship, but failing to find it. So it's in time, but it's also immediate. It's a teaching that applies to this very day of your life. And if the mind will awaken to that, then it can enjoy this great sport of consciousness and see it in everything. Like Ramakrishna said, I saw it in everything. I won't describe to you some of the ways he saw it. Like one time he said, and I'll just use softer language, I saw it in the mating of two dogs. I saw that play, that reality in play, in the meeting of two dogs, male and female dogs. So everything out here is a result of Shiva and Shakti. It's almost Tantra's way of saying everything, it's all Brahman. If you're seeing everything as Shiva and Shakti, then all the poison is taken out of the picture, all the risk, all the suffering. In fact, what's there is just peace and joy and elation. Bliss is that. Well, that's where these beautiful words in Sanskrit come into play. Vichikirsha is one of my favorite. That is this independence, the absolute independence that's there, and the will to create at will. That's Icha Shakti, it's called. And it's not something like blithe and gay or something just off the cuff or something. It's something very deep, very formulated, very direct, and it's going to have it's going to be permeated with profound meaning, especially at this level. So there's that sound that comes first. It's the first sound of Om, which will happen here where the Om sign is, but it has to first be this first vibration. So the first vibration, since everything here is made of vibration, and that's why I talked a little earlier about no vibration, and then intelligent vibration, thought vibration, energy vibration, and then matter vibration. We're only looking at matter vibration, and finding, if we look too deeply into that it's nothing. It's puzzling, too swift for the senses to comprehend and even for the mind to think about. So how is it going to go to even more incomprehensible things, like prana, which Vivekananda said the West didn't know about when he came here. And tanmatras, how the elements have a subtle essence to them that's deeper in you, and before the elements came out as solid and liquid and gaseous and so forth. So this subtle nada, you see, that's why I started out chanting today, Chaitanyaha Shashvata Shanto Vyomatita Niranjanaha Bindu nada kalatita tasmai Sri Gurave namaha. Bindu nada kalatita. See, Bindu nada and bijam, that is time. This is called a trikona, and this is a very powerful teaching that will only get initiated when this egg that is the subtle nada, or it comes from the word sound, also comes from the word channel, how to create a nadi. Their love is is going to burst, like a soul being born, like a mind-born soul, a very powerful penetration of emanation, like even right here into the physical world, like Sri Ramakrishna's birth, and with Swami Vivekananda not far apart, and the births of Jesus and the births of Buddha and so forth. These are all huge events at a very high level that are so powerful that they'll penetrate to the earth and produce a body. It has less to do with individual wills and more to do with just being. If consciousness is played with like that by beings who know how to play, then what's going to happen is it's got ramifications far below it, like effects of a boulder falling in an ocean, Sri Ramakrishna used to say. A boulder meaning a fiery, what do they call, meteor, from all of a sudden hits a big body of water. He had a big vision like that when in his meditations once. All the hissing and smoke and fire and water and vapor and sound and a huge ramification of something that penetrates into a powerful level like that. So, again, trying to use words to describe this bursting of the subtle bindu. And you can see in parens there what would help is because some of us have had good experience with the for the tattvas, the word tattva. Without her, one chant says, all the tattvas would be like clouds with no rain, Tantra says. So he and she are in that bursting, and all the tattvas are in potential in them. So all the worlds, the 24 cosmic principles, if you want to put it in Samkhya terms, which go all the way back to the Mahat, as we know, and then finally back to Purusha and Prakriti. So Purusha and Prakriti would be a sort of general symbol for Shiva and Shakti. That is what's produced from them. It's all held in potential in them. So if you want to say at that point, Shiva was Niskala, right? And now all of a sudden, apparently so, it's become Sakala. So it didn't have time before. Now it's taking it on. And so Bindu, Kala, Nadatita, these are powerful words that have to do with the word, how it, in this case, bursts, produced this trikona, because a triangle is a locked-in formula, you see. It's got three sides. Unlike two lines or one line, three lines can come together and form a place with consciousness in it, where consciousness gets concentrated. That whole thing is behind the powerful symbols of India. It's behind the teaching of mantra, mudra, tantra, and yantra. We used to say mantra, tantra, and yantra, and then siddhanta. You see, we have to put those together and come to a conclusion about them the way they have. They're showing us here their secret. You see, the secret of how they saw everything come about. And to me, it's sort of goes beyond the philosophical teaching of form and formlessness, like, oh, formlessness is better and form isn't. When form gets taken on, then there's all these problems, but that's not what's happening here. This is not what Sri Ramakrishna experienced. He said he couldn't even come down to the 3 lower worlds. He could only come down as far as the heart chakra. He was running a boat race, he said, between these 4 chakras all the time. So he's in this realm all the time, having bliss, having peace, and naturally emanating goodness to all the worlds, even the 3 worlds below. So Sakala Shiva, with time, is the very essence of wisdom and manifestation. Across the board, Mahashakti, that is what she's called there, is divine will and power. So when you have those 2 together, then you have Shiva's family. Basically, Shiva's family consists of Ganesha, who's all fortune, all good fortune and auspiciousness, and Kartikeya, the god of war against evils. So this is Shiva's family, along with Shakti. This is their family. And so he's a family man as well as a transcendental being. It's what this song by Tulsidas is talking about him as a manifestation of this great soul, like seeing Vivekananda on earth. That's Shiva. At least that's Shiva you just saw. So there is a whole chart on the Trikona that I could bring out here, but of course we are trying to move through some of these teachings and get to other levels and tattvas. But there you see those, the Bindu bursts, and then this Bindu, or formless Jnanam, is in Shiva here. And on the other side is the Bijams, the words, Shakti, wisdom, potency. That's all the wisdom in a word. How words are so powerful. We were talking about that on our drive over to the ashram today. The power in words and how we sort of just take it for granted. Oh, I understand that, and walk away. Or just talking to our neighbor over the fence, just commonplace words. How's the weather? Mantra level of things. And we never get to this, or we have forgotten about how words like this in Sanskrit were mediums for higher understanding, or if you want to put it that way, for keeping understanding higher instead of letting it fall, plunge into the insanity that the world is so well known for, particularly today. In the middle there is the stimulatory medium, the nada, you see, the channel. And it's the cause for name and form. So what gets brought together here is this wisdom and potential and her will. And that's put into the cause for nama rupa. And this is where, at this level, you could start indicating the rishis, the gods, goddesses, those same beings that you just are doing 5 yagas to. That's where all that started. The great sacrifice, as it were, is to make all these words possible and potential, these worlds possible and potential for all these beings, these mind-born sons, like the 10 sons of Lord Brahma, mind-born, intelligence-born, and a whole set of 7 worlds or more, depending on which system you look into, all coming out of this subtle power that burst out of their love, their union, and their vichikirsha, their desire to play, sport, and for the highest benefit of all beings, so that all this wisdom can now become manifest. That was, you might say, we've had the whole Adam and Eve thing taught to us. You might say, here's Tantra's way of saying it was all intended to be perfect, because it is all perfect all the time. The benefit of the Hindu darshanas, the Indian darshanas, say, why are you worrying about sin and ignorance and suffering and all that? You fell far from the source, didn't you? What's the matter with you? get on board here, see, and see what's really happened. Who's your daddy? Who's your mama? I mean, ask the question in a spiritual way and find out your connection to the highest deities and how that all merges in the Great Self with no differences, no separations. Well, that begins to become known as a philosophy called Shabda Brahman. Holy Mother mentioned that quite often. Nada Brahma, Shabda Brahman, it's the philosophy of sound, not just sound that you would hear outwardly with the ears, which is, I think, very important now for us, so that we can trace it inward to its source, the meaning of words and so forth. But also how that is called, and how it's based on this primal vibration, Omkara. We'll look at that hopefully at the end of class today, by the time we get there, Omkara. It's taking the word Om and then making it Kara, cause. It's the cause of everything. So if you want to find the cause of everything, go to God's Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. So before the Word was God, and that the two were just one thing, which is kind of what we're saying here, then it was with God. So when it was with God, the sport was going on. That's how I would interpret that saying of Jesus to John, Vedantically. Yeah, it may have its own meaning inside of Christianity too, but that's a good way of saying that. And again, along with this idea that this intention of sportive play for peace, bliss, love and light, knowledge, wisdom, all the good qualities probably should be counted into the picture here, you see, instead of something that's evil or sin-based or meant to suffer, that's productive of problems that the seers, when they, who are emanations of these great beings, come to earth, they see people suffering. 6 passions, 8 fetters, 9 obstacles, 5 kleshas. You can get your paper out and make lists, and I'll start telling you all of these lists that they've come up with. You won't find one of them on this system. Not one of those will be intimated by this system. This is all for sportive play by consciousness that knows itself as consciousness. So if you want to use the word creation, there's where it really all begins. And that's where you see here the Tanmatras and their 5 elements. Sound, touch, color, taste, and smell as thoughts in the mind turning into ether, air, fire, water, and earth. If Tantra got that from Samkhya Yoga, from Lord Kapila, then it's been older than we even imagine it is. Because, of course, they are beginning to dig up statues of Pashupati and Shiva in Harapaho and along the river, Indus River and something, that are carbon dated to be very ancient, back when sometimes the matriarchy was there, the Divine Mother was the one worshipped, other times Shiva was there, but most likely they both were there and being worshipped simultaneously. And this was in the earliest time, when the Indus River was still flowing, thousands of years ago. The Indus River Valley, they called it. So the excavations there are unearthing some very old articles that are pointing us to this idea of how this tantric element in India's darshanas was in full swing there, and this kind of sportive play was going on, and they knew that the elements were connected to the Tanmatras that long ago. See. Do we know any of that here today, or are we just looking at air, earth, fire, water, and ether and not even seeing them the way they truly are? What to say, what they represent at a subtler level of our consciousness in an inner world, like your dreams tonight. what are your dreams formed of? You're still playing with air, for earth, fire, water, and ether there in your dreams. And you're putting them together in any object you want. Those are called tanmatras, or subtle elements. So a little bit about what I could fit on an 8x11 about Srishti Rahasya, this beautiful system in India that you find mentioned in the Upanishads quite often. And like those words, Srishti Rahasya, sort of transcend or break through the barriers of what was Vedic Sanskrit and what was pre-Vedic Sanskrit and what was Upanishadic Sanskrit and what was yogic Sanskrit and what was the Gita's Sanskrit when Krishna used it. Different kinds of levels of Sanskrit were being used. So Srishti Rahasya is one of those expressions that just penetrates through and is seen in two of these great rivers, the two great rivers I used to call them, Vedanta and Tantra. So that came up a lot in my study. I kept seeing that, looked into it. I had to look into it via the way the Shaivites, Kashmiri Shaivism views it, and a couple other forms of Shaivism. And then also how some of the Upanishads, what the context it was in, how they viewed it. So there you'll find that it's one of the entries on this chart, followed fittingly by samsara, that when Srishti Rahasya kicks in and you're at the level of the Om's already burst, we don't know what happened, and we're as thick as a brick, as dumb as a stone, and have the consciousness of a dead bush nowadays. So now from that level, you're talking about, I even forgot what the meaning of sound, touch, color, taste, and smell is all about. How the ears hear, how the eyes see. I mean, right in the Prajna Upanishad, that's a statement. They find out via Om and Prana how the eyes see, how the ears hear, how the nose smells, how the tongue tastes. It's right there. The Prana is carrying that message. But having forgotten all that then, you fall into the hands of the gross elements. And the senses, of course, are involved. So the subtle senses, or your senses in dream, playing with the subtle elements, and then down to the grossest state of manifestation, which, if you're a realized soul, is just the same. It's all made of Brahman, or it's all made of, like Sri Ramakrishna said, it's all Shiva and Shakti in play here. So he wasn't seeing problems, He wasn't accenting the fact that birth, growth, disease, old age, and death were problems of transformation. He was looking at everything as the union of Shiva and Shakti, and therefore he didn't suffer the 6 transformations. Probably because, being an Advaitist, he already knew that they were not real, that only Brahman was real. So if you take a knower of Brahman who knows that only Brahman is real and puts him in a tantric field, you get a Sri Ramakrishna. See? He knows Brahman's real, so now he can sport with Shiva and Shakti without the attendance of any of these problems that other people are suffering or holding on to, either clinging to death, being the 5th lowest hell. I said it to a lady in a store the other day. She walked up to her and she said, "Back off." Because I was standing in the right place, 6 feet distance, right? But she thought I was too close. She said, "Back off." And I said, "Don't be so fearful. That's just clinging to life." And she just didn't know what to say, who's this? But I saw her complaining to the manager about me later, so I split. Be careful what you say to people in the throes of darkness. So if you find yourself down here in the 5 elements, yeah, that's risky business. If you've forgotten along the way who you are, which you never should have forgotten. You might say, for the aspirant, life is a practice, a play, Like life is a rehearsal for death, and death is just divesting yourself of limitations. So you should be, with every breath, you should be using your eternal companion, sporting with him, her, it, that, and continually going through the motions here to make sure karma doesn't form, like dissolving the mind stream in your meditation at the end of every day, before you go to sleep, and starting out fresh, Nitya Sarga they call that, eternally enthused by everything that's about to happen in the field of Shiva and Shakti, rather than, what's going to go on in Maya today? Rebel against Maya, good luck with that. So if we move onward to these two charts, which I'm not sure if we'll have the time in the first half to get through, but we will at least be able to enter into this one, Trividam Dukkam. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Four Noble Truths weren't necessarily all new material, though at 550 years BC it was. There have been thousands of years had passed since Lord Kapila fathered this system. This is in the only existing Samkhya scripture that we know of now, Tattva Samasa Sutras, I think. And I don't think they even have the whole of that. But the Samkhya scriptures are mostly all gone, so what we can glean from what's left is that in one of those slokas, he mentions the three types of suffering. So that's a very early mention of this system and its knowledge, thousands of years before the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, and there's a cause for it and all that. So you can see that this was known to, and is known to, the Vedicists, Tantricists, yogis, Samkhyists, and Jains, Buddhists, and so forth. As time in a cycle goes on, it's something that's even in the Gita, which is where you see this at the top of the chart, and we like to introduce it by saying, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I mean, may peace be unto us, may peace be unto all, may peace be unto the three worlds. I think I mentioned last week that I was talking to a professor on the email, and I ended one or two of my messages with peace times three, peace times three. He wrote back, he said, why not peace times infinity, peace times infinity? I said, infinity doesn't need peace. It's not looking for peace, it's already that. The three worlds need peace. That's where all the strife is going on, struggle. I mean, that whole Mahisha Sura Stotram that I sang one verse of earlier is all about struggle on the battlefield. The entire Srimad Devi Bhagavatam is, and the Chandi, the Divine Mother Scriptures, are about struggle on the battlefield. The Quran has all struggle on the battlefield. The Bible, struggle on the battlefield. Every religion is couched in the problem of war. All its scriptures. You can't find one that isn't. The Sikh scripture, Siddh Granthi, I mean, you look everywhere, the Old Testament, how much war was going on all the time everywhere. The three worlds need peace. And the longer they can keep them, the better it's going to be for them, because you need peace first and foremost. My students here with me say, having heard me say it, repeat it from Holy Mother, you need peace of mind first and foremost. Why? Because, as Krishna says in the Gita, anything you do, any action you undertake, and probably any thought that you think that isn't with peace is going to produce karma. It's just that simple. Restlessness produces karma in action. And your erratic thoughts produces karma. And people act on those then, and that makes the karma, here, back here on the level of 5 elements. You're getting karma straight from everything you interact with. And then you're passing away and carrying it with you, Holy Mother says, Nothing goes with you except that karma, she says, with the mind. You'll take that with you, and then that'll cause you to come back into another body with that karma to pay. And over lifetimes, they don't pay it. They run away from it. They seek pleasure, and many other ways of which don't get to the point of things. And the three kinds of suffering are following you, she says. Every lifetime they follow you, along with your karma. So that's why we say Shanti, Shanti, Shanti is at the top of this chart. This picture here I took of the burning ghats in Benares, Varanasi, from the river. A distant picture. And you can see, corpses are being burnt and various things like that. And so, as we were talking before class, birth, life, death is kind of seen by India. It's acknowledged. It's not trying. You don't push it under the carpet and hide it, or from your children. Don't tell them about death. And Swami Vivekananda said, we don't try and hide death away. We actually meditate on it. We don't hide it away. We meditate on it to chase it away, because it's not real. And all the things that are leading up to it and producing more of the same, producing karma around fear of death. So there you see, under Shanti, 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 these three great statements that Arjuna asks about in the Bhagavad Gita: Adibhuta, Adidaiva, and Adiyatma. Adibhuta is nature and living beings. Adidaiva, the celestial realms, we might call them angels in this country, and the gods and the devas. And then Adhyatma, the mental, the internal, what's a part of our own individual mind, which we would look at another time here. And if you modify those three words from the Gita, because there's Adiyagya is also there, but we already went through the Yagya, and there's one more entry to it later on in that chart we're using as the foundational chart here. When you get down to the collective, it's Pancha Yagya, sacrifice is our first duty. So at the collective level, we'll have one more teaching on sacrifice, but here you see it pretty much stated. Adiyagya, but these three go earlier with Lord Kapala's system. So if you modify those Sanskrit words a bit and make it Adibhaudika, that would be these original external dangers that are always there in life, in relativity. Adidaivika is transpersonal dangers, and Adhyatmika is intrapersonal dangers. So these are the three sufferings in the three worlds. And they, world to world, that is lower chakra to middle chakra to Manipuri chakra, these are somewhat the same, but of course only differing in levels of substance or karma. Under Adibhaudika external dangers, the list is dangers that come from nature, are floods, earthquakes, plagues, and famines, for instance. Transpersonal dangers under Adidaivika are those dangers from lower realms. Disembodied spirits, asuras, they occupy a lower level of consciousness within us. You could say, the asura told me to do it. See, this is one of the demons in my nature told me to do it. And the enemies you have, of course, and the ancestors that you're trading places with, who aren't always there for your highest good. They want to pull you into Maya more and more in most cases. So that comes under the second type of suffering. And then Adhyatmika is pretty much your own suffering that you're bringing upon yourself. It's mental because all of those things come from the mind. And there's a short list of a few combination of yamas and niyamas here. Desire, passion, jealousy, fear, greed, depression. You could call them kleshas, and you could find many more than that in the list too. So there you see these three and being defined for you. Now, a secondary level of adibadika would be from living beings, like microorganisms, insects, animals, and other human beings. Those are also posing dangers and types of suffering or miseries in these three worlds. Trividam dukkam. Dukkha means to pain, basically. Trividam is these three kinds of knowledge around pain. And then the secondary level of Adidaivika is higher realms. You can also have influence from demigods, siddhas, devas, and devis. The gods and so forth, they have their eyes also fixed on earth and the beings that are there, and as well as connected to higher worlds that they preside over. So that soul who realizes all gods and goddesses are within them, as some of the beautiful scriptures and songs of India say, they become in knowledge of Brahma. The 4 feet of Brahman are theirs, and then they're not under the influence of the gods and goddesses anymore. So that's what's told as a solution to getting out from under the influences of human beings, or demigods, or siddhas, or devas, or devis. You know, some people, you might say, are even under the control of their pets, or control of plants in their house. Oh, I can't go because I got to water my plants. See, get someone else to do it, and go on retreat and meditate. Do something deeper for your higher good, and don't let anything stand in your way. If you get attached to a dented tin pot, Holy Mother said, like she saw some people she met, then how are you going to have any higher thoughts? How are you going to get rid of your attachment to rebirth with your ancestors, as Father of Yoga talks about? That's a problem. It's a very deep samskar in you to want to keep taking a body in this life where there's karma and samskars. We thought this isn't really taking a body here, see. It could be even assuming a body, but like we just mentioned in Sri Ramakrishna's case, who was one of the great examples, or the great example of how to live in the truth of Brahman, then all those things were absent in him. If he felt them, he would only feel them for the sake of his disciples. A secondary level of the adhyatmika suffering is physical imbalances, and you'll find that listed, for instance, in Patanjali's Yoga too. A few mentions of it, that is, broken into 3 parts. Things that can cause you disease are the dhatus, the rasas, and the karanas. So basically it's about imbalance in the body. And you would have to take good food and bless it, and take good exercise, and that would mean good food for your mind, your thinking process, and exercise for your mind too, in a spiritual sense. Like, just physical exercise alone isn't going to be as good as the exercise of reading the Gita with your guru. That's mental exercise you're doing. So that's going to be much more beneficial. In the dhatus, blood, flesh, bones, air, bile, phlegm. There are people who focus in on this as if it were yoga only. That they just pretty much look at the body only. And the fluid essences, hormones, gastric, and so forth. But I think the redeeming part of this 3-part division is the karanas, because what's the cause to all those are the senses, and importantly, the mind. The active senses, the cognitive mind, If you tuned into that part of Patanjali's teachings, then you would say, well, the cause for everything out there is from the mind, you see. And what my senses did to me caused me to suffer, see. So there's no excuse for narrowing down the field of yoga to hatha when you have a teaching like that in Patanjali's yoga. That even he is telling you at that level of physical things and suffering, it comes from the mind and your senses aren't under control. Those are teachings you need to hear and rectify. Your body, anything you do out there, breathing, asana, dancing, church going, is not going to change you whatsoever. There's no transformation in that. If there were, then we'd all be enlightened by now. Because we've been doing that for cycles. We've been doing through those same things all the time, and they're not helping us. They're just making us return again along the path of the moon with karmas in tow and creating more on top of that, piling more gloom on gloom, as Vivekananda says. So look into restraining the senses and purifying the mind. You know, the prana is going to help there, but if you can't yet cognize the importance of the prana, then try, restrain your senses. Vedanta won't even go that low. If your senses aren't under control, they won't teach you. So at least yoga dips down into that. So I hope that that view of trividam dukkam acted as a nice splash of cold water in your face after dreaming about the beautiful tantric couple, Shiva and Shakti, and all the bliss that was there. It's a good balance we have here between joy and suffering, good and bad and so forth, higher and lower. And after the break, we'll look at the rest of this chart, which has to do with these 8 great accomplishments that Lord Kapila also gave us. And we'll also look at a chart called the 3 causes of bondage and the 3 causes of liberation. Nice that even in a teaching like that, there is such a thing for being free. There's a word for it. There's a philosophy for it. It exists. So in that way, that's also refreshing news inside of the teaching of what binds you. So here, let's take a break and return after 15 minutes to continue on with points and principles of the Upanishads. Namaste.